All right, so today we are diving into a topic that most people, I think it's fair to say, try to avoid talking about because it
Hmm.
can be very difficult. We are talking about abortion.
It's a big one.
It is a big one, but on the deep dive, we don't shy away from the big ones.
That's right. We go deep.
That's right. And today we are going deep with the help of, well, anonymously sourced blog posts
Okay.
from a self-proclaimed pro-life writer, as they put it, who asked some really interesting questions
Yeah.
from, their point of view.
Interesting.
It's not your typical sort of talking points, that you tend to hear with this topic.
Yeah, and it's interesting to see, I guess, like you said, someone engaging with this in a way that's trying to be more thoughtful than, I don't know, reiterating what we've heard a million times.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And one of the things that this blogger really tries to unpack is, like, the definition of abortion.
Okay.
They say, we always think about abortion as this, like, elective termination of a pregnancy, but, like, what about, for example, a miscarriage,
Mm.
which
Right.
is medically called a spontaneous abortion?
Yeah.
Like, does that count?
Well, and that's where the medical side of this really comes into play because, medically speaking, there is a very clear distinction. A spontaneous abortion is a miscarriage. It's a naturally occurring loss of pregnancy.
Right.
Whereas what we typically refer to in the abortion debate is induced abortion, which is a medical procedure.
Mhm.
And, this distinction, while clear medically, does raise a lot of questions
Right.
within the pro-life movement, especially when you start looking at things like ectopic pregnancies.
And this is a great example of, like, the nuance that this blogger gets into. This
Right.
isn't just like
Yeah.
a simplified version of things.
Right.
They actually go into the weeds. They cite medical texts that are used by pro-life organizations
Oh, wow.
to say, what do we do about cases like this? When it's an ectopic pregnancy, when the woman's life is at risk.
Yeah. Right, because then it really does challenge that stance of, no abortion, no exceptions kind of thing.
Exactly. And then they get into things like, well, what about minors who get pregnant?
Mhm.
What about in cases where there are, that the fetus has, like, really severe abnormalities? And it gets them to actually say, like, is pro-life even the right term? Should we be saying, pro-birth?
Because that is a very different thing, and that's really challenging people to think, like, beyond just, okay, abortion is wrong, to what does it actually mean to support a life?
Yes.
Or potentially support a life that might be coming into very difficult circumstances.
And that's where they get into, well, shouldn't we be focusing on things like better social systems?
Exactly.
Addressing issues like poverty,
Mm-hmm.
which might lead someone to not want to feel like they can't have a child.
Yeah, absolutely. Like looking at those systematic factors that contribute to, situations where people might find themselves with limited choices.
Exactly. And that, they were saying, should be part of what it means to actually be pro-life.
Totally.
Yeah.
I mean, to me, that's a very different conversation than just saying abortion is wrong.
Right.
Yeah.
And they're very critical, which I found interesting, about the language
Okay.
that is often used even within the pro-life movement.
Oh, interesting.
Saying, like, the way that, for example, people who identify as pro-choice are talked about.
Yeah.
Like, it's not helpful.
Yeah.
It just shuts down conversation.
Well, right, because it creates this us versus them mentality, and it doesn't allow for any nuance.
Exactly. And they're saying we have to be able to have these nuanced conversations.
And I think, that really ties into the whole concept of reproductive justice, too, which is something that often gets left out of these conversations.
And what is that exactly?
So reproductive justice is a framework that goes beyond just the legal right to abortion.
Okay.
It emphasizes access to health care, economic security, really the ability to make informed decisions about your reproductive life free from coercion.
So it's about having, like, the actual means.
Exactly. It's about having the means and the agency to make choices that are right for you and your circumstances. And that includes, choosing to have children if and when you want to. But it also means having the support you need if you choose to have children.
And that really seems to be what this blogger was advocating for, looking at all these different factors.
Yeah, absolutely. They're pushing for a more holistic approach, I think. One that recognizes that these issues are incredibly complex, there are no easy answers, and we need to be willing to have these difficult conversations with nuance and compassion.
And even though they identify as pro-life, they're actually going through and analyzing arguments made by prominent figures, in the pro-life movement.
Oh, wow.
To say, like, this doesn't track. Like, here are some of the inconsistencies. Here are some of the contradictions.
Wow. So they're really holding everyone accountable, it sounds like.
Yeah. It's very interesting. It's almost like they're calling for, like, intellectual honesty, you know?
Yeah, totally. Like a willingness to engage in good faith dialogue even when there's disagreement.
Yes. Which I think is ultimately what makes this deep dive so fascinating.
Absolutely. It's a reminder that even within entrenched positions, there's always room for deeper understanding, for asking questions, for maybe even finding some common ground.
Yes. So if someone does, find themselves agreeing with some of those arguments, that are typically seen as being pro-life,
Mm-hmm.
but also believe in supporting a woman's right to choose, how do you reconcile those viewpoints?
Right. How do you navigate that space? It's a question that I think a lot of people probably grapple with, and this deep dive really brings it to the forefront.
Definitely something to think about.